Growing up in Metro Vancouver, I traveled a fair amount down to Seattle and Portland, which are great, distinct cities with their own culture and urbanism that's different from Vancouver. But I'll be honest, most of the trips down to the US were made in a family car. The Amtrak Cascades route, which is actually one of the busiest Amtrak routes outside of the Northeast Corridor, has seen a ton of improvement over the years. But still, it only serves Vancouver proper on the Canadian side, which means that those with cars would be left backtracking on transit just to take a slower train down to Seattle or Portland. The service frequency is also not amazing, with just 2 trains per day to Vancouver and only a train every couple of hours for the rest of the corridor. And while the trains do get up above highway speeds in some sections, they are by no means high speed. But there's a lot of talk about high-speed rail from governments, tech companies, and media, and there's interest in the corridor at the highest levels. So the natural question is, should we just get on with the Japanese-style bullet trains? Welcome to RM Transit, a channel about urban transit and intercity transit. Consider supporting the channel on Patreon to help me bring you more urbanism content. Today, the Amtrak Cascades route is actually pretty good, all things considered. The service runs all the way from Vancouver, BC down to Eugene, Oregon, with 6 trains per day in each direction between Seattle and Portland. 2 every day between Vancouver and Seattle, with some services extending further south to Portland, and daily services between Portland and Eugene. There are of course also various connecting bus services and the transcontinental services out of Vancouver and Seattle, as well as train service south to San Francisco and Los Angeles. Better yet, the stations being called at are often actually quite nice. And historically, the rolling stock has just been awesome, with a distinct paint scheme with cream, brown, and green accents, and really nice Spanish Talgo rolling stock that is straight out of Europe, with lovely interiors as well as cab cars and a fully interconnected train set design, paired up with a mix of locomotives including some new charger units from Siemens. Furthermore, with the Talgo sets aging and the oldest ones already being retired, a new fleet is coming online made up of Siemens chargers and ventures, like we're seeing with Via Rail, Brightline, and Amtrak all over the continent. These are going to be great trains with lower emissions, reconfigurable train lengths, and higher potential top speeds. The travel times are also not terrible. It's not quite as fast as driving straight through, but no one really drives straight through, and once you hit traffic, things can get closer to competitive. And traffic is a real issue in the Pacific Northwest because the just one more lane bros have trouble convincing people to build just one more lane when it involves blowing up half of a hillside. At the same time, the route of the Amtrak Cascades is particularly beautiful, meaning that just sitting in your seat and staring out the window is a lovely experience every time you do it. It's really great. At the same time, demand for travel in the corridor is obviously incredibly high, given how many intercity buses have spun up over the years, while they've disappeared from other parts of North America. And on top of all of that, the integration with other transit is good. In Vancouver, you have a convenient connection to the SkyTrain network, while in Portland, you have the entire MAX network. And there's also a great connection to the growing link system in Seattle, which means that the last mile or last several miles in each city is actually really well handled by rapid transit. I mean, with Eastlink happening, you're soon going to be able to take a train all the way from downtown Vancouver to Redmond and Bellevue without having to step foot on a bus, which is kind of neat. Even better, those riding the Go Transit-esque Sounder trains into and out of Seattle can hop onto an Amtrak Cascades train with the same fare, which is a really unique policy that you see in other countries but rarely in North America. It's actually really useful when you have 2 different services, that is Sounder and Cascades, that are really tightly interlinked in terms of infrastructure and service when you're near Seattle. So naturally, with the service already well used, good connections, a nice traveling experience, and growing populations, there's a desire to take a next step. But what is the next step? There's a lot of talk about true high-speed rail, and the idea of people commuting to Seattle for a midday meeting at 200 miles per hour. But, and I hate to be a wet blanket, I think that true high-speed rail is the wrong move for this corridor. In a video earlier this year, I talked a lot about why I thought a 125 mile per hour line between Calgary and Edmonton made a lot of sense. The cities just aren't that big, and the train doesn't need to be that fast to be competitive. I'm just not sure the likely far higher price to go twice as fast is justified. And the situation is more or less the same in the Pacific Northwest. Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland, even with a lot of growth, will still be medium-sized in North American city terms. And the cost to do true high-speed rail on the Cascades corridor is going to be way higher than in a place like Alberta because of the geography. It's a lot like traveling from, say, Tokyo to Osaka. There's tons of hills, mountains, and rivers, which means lots of tunnels and bridges. And while in Japan, the enormous populations would justify that expense, and in Spain, the smaller populations can manage because everything is built so inexpensively, it just seems incredibly unlikely that Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland are going to justify a project that's easily as technically complex as something like California high-speed rail, but with way less population. But what's good is that that's okay. The funny thing about serious passenger rail being so uncommon in North America and our speed limits on highways being pretty consistently 100 kilometers per hour or 60 miles per hour is that we limit land transportation to fairly low speeds that can be absolutely smoked by not even high-speed rail services, which can fly along at double the speed of highway traffic. There are actually already plans from WashDOT which already sort of set out a path for future upgrades for the Cascade service, with more daily trains between the various cities and potentially higher top speeds of up to 90 miles per hour or around 140 kilometers per hour. These improvements would even get the train travel times down below current driving times, which is amazing. But I believe we need to dream just a little bit bigger and then we'd have a wonderful solution. These plans from WashDOT should be executed, but amped up. With crossing removals and line straightenings in a few places, there's no reason you couldn't get up to 200 kilometers per hour or 125 miles per hour, which are actually the top speeds that the charger-powered trains can already handle. At the same time, higher top speeds would potentially allow you to increase frequency with less infrastructure, since trains would be able to get to their passing points more quickly. With Brightline Florida and other passenger railways in North America upping the ante on speed, I really think the Pacific Northwest can aim a little higher. But at the same time, with population growth and traffic only getting worse, this will make passenger trains far and away the best option for getting between the cities. And that means providing more capacity, both by lengthening trains and perhaps putting 2 locomotives on each, like you see with Brightline, as well as operating far more service. While WashDOT and Amtrak are still talking about train service in terms of trains per day, we should be going for trains per hour. An hourly service with key sections of the route potentially seeing half-hourly service would be a game changer. And while it would mean rebuilding some stations, these could be turned into new high-density transit-oriented development nodes, with high-quality housing and offices flanking these sleek new train stations. While hourly service isn't quite turn up and go, for service that's this much faster than driving, it's pretty close. Now, actually achieving this will involve a mix of approaches. In some cases, like with the Point Defiance Bypass project that cut 5 minutes off of travel times in the corridor, that will look like passenger priority or passenger exclusive rail corridors that can have steeper grades that wouldn't be appropriate for freight trains. In other cases, I think we should look east to Toronto for the solution. The GO Sub is a passenger rail exclusive rail subdivision in the suburbs east of Toronto that is fully grade separated and dedicated to passenger trains. Which sounds too good for North America, so how did it get built? Well, actually, by using land from CN and a grade separation at the western end of the corridor. This 2 railways, 1 corridor approach allows for higher speeds for passenger trains, no schedule interference so that passenger and freight capacities are maximized, and the ability for passenger tracks to be maintained and upgraded over time without having to keep going back to the freight railway to beg for improvements. It's the obvious solution for so many places in North America and the special sauce that would allow us to operate more frequency and higher speeds. Of course, the linchpin in all of this is Seattle and the highly constrained BNSF tracks and tunnel under the downtown core. To really unlock incredible regional and intercity rail for the entire Pacific Northwest, this problem needs to be solved, but it is solvable. King Street Station seems to have just enough room around it that you could build another cross-city tunnel, but to more forgiving passenger train standards that could allow a steeper tunnel that could dive under the existing one. And the tunnel doesn't need to be that expensive because you don't need to build underground stations on it, which often drive the price of such underground projects. Just maybe use 2 tunnel boring machines, unlike with the debacle that was the SR99 tunnel project. If you're not familiar, worth a Google. While a new tunnel through Seattle would be a non-trivial project, it gets you over the main barrier to more passenger rail service and infrastructure across the entire region. And with it could even come electrification that would minimize ventilation requirements for a new tunnel and potentially kick off an electrification blitz across the entire corridor. At the same time, while costs would be significant, Seattle, with all of its sound transit funding, should be able to find a way. And this would be the backbone that could allow the Sounder service to turn from the rather sad commuter service it is today to an all-day frequent service like what's happening with Caltrain. The final thing that's essential are improvements on the Canadian side of the corridor. That looks like additional track capacity, but also additional stations. A big reason why BC hasn't been super interested in investing in Cascades is because it doesn't actually serve people traveling within BC. Even if in reality it does reduce congestion on highways which are in BC, which benefits BC anyways, but I digress. New stations in South Surrey White Rock as well as near Scott Road could make Cascades a much more compelling option for people across Metro Vancouver and connecting from other transit services. It could also help divert people who might drive down to Seattle because both stations could be proximal to some major highways like Highway 1 and Highway 99. A White Rock bypass tunnel, while it would be expensive, would improve safety and could potentially allow for suburban-style rail services to spin up just on the Canadian side, allowing you to have a rapid connection between Burnaby, New Westminster, Vancouver, and South Surrey White Rock. At the same time, a better solution for the border crossing needs to be figured out, and that's a big reason that additional stations haven't been added in Canada yet. Fortunately, this can be and should be a national level priority, since it would benefit several different Amtrak services which travel into Canada. There is a precedent for how to solve this problem in other parts of the world and potentially at Canadian airports with pre-clearance. A smoother, faster immigration process isn't easy, but it is again a solvable problem. And with that, and a few $billion, we could have a faster than driving and very frequent intercity train service for the Pacific Northwest, and something which could be the backbone for sustainable transportation growth for one of the most beautiful regions in the entire world. And it's all incrementally buildable. We just need to get on with that building. Thanks for watching.